Yay, live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Encounters 2020. My name is Peter Machen. I'm talking to Stéphane Riethauser today, the director of the wonderful documentary MACHEN. Welcome, Stéphane.
Hello, Peter. Hello, everyone.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. I'm in France right now, talking to you live. I wish I could have been there live in person. I've never been to South Africa before, but the miracles of technology make it possible that we can communicate. So I'm really happy to share my film also with the South African audience.
Yes, thank you so much for doing so. It's a wonderful film. And before we start, I just want to mention what you said earlier, that you're actually in your grandma's house, your grandmother's house right now.
Yes, I'm actually on holidays with a couple of friends here in my grandma's house that is actually featured in the film. And we've had this house in the family now for many decades, and I always spend my holiday here. I was just a few days ago in Paris. My film, Madame, is being released in French cinemas. So I'm working every day also. This is like my summer office for these 2 weeks. And there are many festivals I was going to attend. I wish I could have been there in South Africa. I was also invited in the Ukraine, in Kiev. I just had a Q&A with them also. So my film is being shown all around the world, also in Brazil and in Hong Kong in the next few days. It's quite thrilling. Unfortunately, I can't travel with my little baby and with my grandmother, but it's possible still. We're talking to each other. I'm really happy.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you're still talking, I mean, there's still an ongoing conversation with your grandmother. We'll get to the film shortly. I just want to quickly ask you about the reception in France. How was it the other day?
It was great. I was really thrilled. My distributor was happy too. We had the premiere, the official premiere in a beautiful cinema, Majestic Bastille. It's an independent cinema, really old theater. And we had about 70 people. But due to the corona restrictions, they couldn't really be more. And it's also summer. It's really hot right now in France. People are still on holidays. The film was actually to be released in March. And 3 days before the official release, the theaters were closed due to the corona crisis. So it was a big disaster. The communication, the campaign was out, and we were already in the media, and everything had to be shut down and then put on hold. And now my distributor decided to release it. The reviews are amazing. Tomorrow there's a big critic to be published in the main newspaper of France, Le Monde, which is a big honor for me. It's the first time that one of my film makes it to the theaters in France. The critics until now are really positive, and the response of the audience is too. And that night I had many people coming up to me, people that I didn't know, telling me that they cried. And I was so moved that these people I didn't know came up to me and saying, your grandma touched us, your story touched us. So this is the best present. This is the best thing a filmmaker can hear when he shares his film.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I just watched the film again this morning. And at the end, I surprised myself a second time by crying again. But let's talk about it a little bit. In a way, the film is a lifetime's work, and even longer. Perhaps 2 lifetimes. But can you tell us a little bit about the birthing of the film? When you first decided you were going to make this project, and how close the final film is to your original vision?
Yeah, it's a long story. I'm going to try to make it short, but it started with the flamboyant personality of my grandmother. I was very close to her, and I didn't want her stories to get lost. So I started filming her when she turned 90, and I made a series of interviews with her because I didn't want her memory to get lost. And I did it only on a private matter. I didn't think of making a movie about this. It was just to record this for the family. And she was an actor also. She was a comedian, and she liked being in front of the camera. She would play with me. And one day she even told me, oh, maybe you can make a film about my life one day. And I honestly didn't take it quite seriously, because I didn't see a film there with this home video footage that I made. But it's only many years later, 10 years after her death, actually, that I watched these little videotapes that I had made. There was DV at the time. It was late 90s, early 2000. And when I looked at these tapes, I was like, oh my God, there is maybe something to be told about the condition of women. And I decided to research the matter. I decided to gather all the archive material that I had about her, from her. So photographs, and then I had audio recordings also that I put into the film, these voice messages that she left on my answering machine. And I thought they were so cute and so funny, and that maybe I could do something with that material. And I had no intention of putting myself into this film at first. It was going to be a kind of biography of my grandmother that would reflect the condition of women in the 20th century. She was born into an immigrant family, very poor, didn't have access to education, couldn't learn music. She had a very hard father. She had to marry when she was 16. I mean, she tells it all in the film. And then I was like, this is interesting, but it's maybe not enough. And a very good friend of mine, actually a festival director in Geneva, she's always my fiercest critic. And she looked at the first editing that I had and she said, Stéphane, where's your point of view? You want to say something about the condition of women? You have to say something about your personal view on women, on your grandmother. I was completely absent of the first version of the film. And this sort of gave me it clicked in my head. And during the process of researching material about my grandmother, I stumbled upon a lot of material that regarded me. And I saw images of me as a little boy, of my mom, of my dad. And I had the great privilege to go dig into family archive material that was quite rich. My dad wanted to be a filmmaker, so he filmed us a lot during our childhood with her Super 8 camera. So I watched everything. These are hundreds of hours of material, actually, and thousands of photographs. And I was like, what could I possibly do with that? And then I decided to do something about gender in a more general way, not only about the condition of women, only about the story of my grandmother, but then I realized that if I added and somehow mingled my own coming out story as a gay man, this would maybe give an interesting perspective on gender of two people of two different generations that had actually to go for the same struggle, meaning they had both, my grandma and I, we had both to fight a patriarchal system, a male domination system where the heterosexual male was dominating. And we gay men and gay LGBT people suffer from these social, political, educational structures and norms that impose roles to men and women. And this was an essay now to try to unmingle what values shape us, what norms shape us. And I found out that actually both my grandmother and I, like I was saying, had to fight the same system in order to be free. And that gave me the connection between these two stories and these two destinies. And then I tried to inject as much authenticity, a little bit of humor, and try to make it interesting for an audience that would not be familiar with my family. And this was the biggest challenge, maybe my biggest fear, like, will this be of any interest to somebody that doesn't know me? Because I'm a nobody, and my grandmother, she was a little, she was a little queen in her neighborhood, maybe, but that's it. And I made this little film, and I'm quite amazed at the reactions now, I must say, it generates.
I mean, for me, just like on an artistic level, one of the reasons for that is that it's so specific and so much about you and so much about your grandmother. And it always seems to me that the closer you kind of burrow into kind of subjectivity, the more you kind of get some kind of objective product that is accessible to other people. Do you think that's true?
Say it again. I'm sorry. I didn't quite hear it.
I'm just asking about the film is very specific. There's a lot of, there's a lot of specificity in it, and I'm asking whether you think that degree of specificity makes it more universal.
Probably it does. I think it's the great French philosopher and writer Albert Camus who said, the more intimate you go, the more universal you become.
Yeah.
I tried to have that in mind. It's a risky business. And when I was working on the script, on the text, and then on the editing, I had always in mind it needs to be of some interest to the other audience, but is that not too intimate? Is that irrelevant? Now talking about my ass sometimes, or my sex life, or this little detail, then I got lost on the way many times. Honestly, I didn't know what I was saying anymore, and I have to be very grateful to my team. And I mean by that, it was a very small team, but my longtime assistant, Marie-Catherine Tyler, and my editor, and both, they know me quite well, but they don't know my life and all the details. And they were always reminding me, Stéphane, this sequence might be interesting to you, but it's completely irrelevant for an audience that doesn't know you. And I couldn't see that at first. I was like, but if I don't tell this anecdote, then people will not understand what really happened. So I always tried to stick to the truth, to the facts, but it was like this. And sometimes we had to take some shortcuts. We had to cut out a sequence. This is what I'm trying at the beginning, trying to say at the beginning of the film. I say in the script, in the text, everything that I will say will be biased by the things I will not say. And I had to leave out a lot of things and also give some room to the audience to maybe jump in with their own reflections, with their own stories. I tried to give a little room to that also with some music sequences and stuff like that, and music people could identify with. But the bottom line is, without my team, I would probably not have been able to get the right distance to my own story, because it can be disturbing to see yourself. As much as I love myself, sometimes I can also hate myself, and sometimes in the editing room I would go crazy because I could not stand to see myself anymore. I was like, what am I saying? I'm going to be ridiculous in front of the audience. I'm exposing also my family, as I can be responsible for myself, for my behavior, for my work. But then I am dragging my parents into this story. They didn't ask for anything. And it was a little risky also. I was a little anxious sometimes because it would remind me, some sequences, it would remind them, my parents or my brother, of some painful moments. Also, my coming out, they're not necessarily portrayed in their best light. I am using them as film characters for narrative purpose, to tell my story between my grandmother and myself. And I had to warn my parents, this is not an exhaustive biopic of our family. The viewers might take it as such, but you have to be aware that this is only a film telling some stories put together in a 90-minute editing version that will give some kind of an impression, I hope, and share some kind of message, but it's not our exact family. And they had to cope with that. Yeah.
I mean, there is the inherent nature of film getting in the way. I want to ask you about your family's responses in a little more detail, but first let's watch the trailer of the film for those who might not have seen it.
Okay.
Great.
One, two, three.
Message 1.
Bonjour. Et grand-maman.
Okay, this does not seem to be working too well. Okay, I think we need to abandon that.
Okay, I can't see it either.
I can't see it.
C'est pas possible de se dire,
Okay, there we go.
je vais te parler d'amour. Il y a des choses qui concernent notre sexe.
Je n'attends pas des baisers ni des tendresses, des mots d'amour. J'ai pas eu de chance en amour. J'ai toujours tombé sur des types qui m'exploitent. Or, j'aime mieux dire que ça guérit les hommes, ça. Il n'était pas question qu'une femme fasse des études ou fasse de l'argent. Ça m'a manqué, alors j'ai fait tout ce que j'ai fait. Parce que pour une femme d'affaires qui fait à cette époque, on ne les voulait pas. Hein. J'étais la pestiférée de la famille.
J'ai tellement peur de te rendre malheureuse. Je veux pas te salir avec des mots imprononçables. Alors je devrais te mentir pour te laisser en paix jusqu'à ta mort.
Je pense que si tous les gays, les lesbiennes, les filles de Suisse faisaient leur coming out en même temps, je suis persuadé que l'homophobie disparaîtrait dans les 48 heures. Parce que nous sommes simplement trop nombreux.
Arrête de me filmer. Oh, la sorcière de la maison.
Great. So that was the trailer of your wonderful film. So we apologize for the technical difficulties that we experienced there. I imagine that they are very common at the moment. Before I go any further, Stéphane, we just have a question from somebody in the audience, from Sholofelo Kwakwa, who says, "Thank you for this film, Stéphane. It is truly an emotional film. How long did it take to gather and put together all the videos, images, postcards, diary entries, newspapers and magazines, telephone messages, etc.?"
How long did it take?
There is a lot of content.
Well, thank you, first of all.
Sorry,
Thank you for that message. And it took me quite a long time. It took me altogether more than 5 years since the first notebook that I opened and I said, okay, I want to make a film about my grandmother. Until the day I completed production, 5 years went by. I had to stop production twice because I ran out of money. And also because I didn't know what I wanted to say anymore. And I changed editor along the way. And I made also 2 other films in the meantime. One documentary about a cemetery in Berlin called Garden of Stars. And I made another film for television also to make some money and to be able to take the necessary distance to go back to this very personal project. And like I was saying before, I got lost on the way a few times, looking at old archive material that is actually portraying you and your family. It's your feelings, it's your life. It's not just some remote material. So I could get very emotional. This is something that would never leave me. I would go to bed with it at night and dream about it, and sometimes going a little bananas and was like, what do I want to say? Or like I was saying before, a little bit of anxiety to say, is this going to work? And it was a pleasure, honestly, it was a privilege also, it was a choice to go into this project, but it started very innocently as a very small scale project. And the more it developed, the more I found the bone, and then something that I wanted to say about gender. I tried to make it as good as possible. Obviously, every filmmaker tries to do that. But with this very personal material, it was always an emotional challenge for me to be able to see myself just as a character in a film. And it's funny, in the editing room, every now and then, I would say, Stéphane, referring as the guy on the screen, but not me. And sometimes it was the other way around. My editor was saying, oh, this sequence is of no use. It gets to the trash immediately. And I was like, no, you can't talk to me like that. This is my life. It's like you're cutting my right arm. You can't do this. And I was like, okay. She said, you have to process this. But let me tell you one thing. By the end of the week, this sequence is out of the film. So deal with it. And I was like, okay. And most of the time she was right. I just had to process it myself because, as I was saying before, my desire was to be as true to my feelings and to what I had experienced as possible. And this was not always true. So you have to find some kind of tricks in the editing or in the text, in the image of saying exactly what you want to say, but maybe not in the way you thought you were going to say it. And we found tricks and we found links between the sequences. Is this sequence working? Is this responding to the sequence that comes after? Are people going to reflect the way I imagine they would? Maybe they found some other connection, some other ways. This is the beauty about film also. And to conclude on this, we had a very, very long and tedious process of editing. We went back and forth with the voiceover. I wanted to avoid to tell with my voice what people were seeing on the screen. Sometimes you need to give an explanation. Sometimes you have to reach or to put another level of narration and try to distort or take some distance from the image or put some irony or put some humor in order to put that feeling across. And hopefully it worked, but we reached a point at some point where I said, I think we have it. And this point came very, very late because before that, I thought I had it. I was like, okay, this is final cut now. I waited a couple days. I watched it again. I was like, no, this doesn't work again. And this voice doesn't work in that passage. So we did it over and over and over again until finally it was like, okay, I'm quite happy with it. And now also I ran out of, now it's time for the baby to go out to the world.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I think that's scary enough anyway. And there's certainly enough ego involved in any kind of filmmaking process. So when you are on the, you know, when you're on the screen for a good deal of the time and you're also making the film, I'm sure, you know, there are a whole lot of extra layers of that. There's a related question from Taryn Jaffe, who asks, please can you talk about how the camera was turned on you so many times throughout the years? Were you self-aware of this documentation as a process of archiving memories? And what does this kind of self-referential process mean to you? She says it's an amazing film.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I was always kind of aware that, of course, my dad filmed me and my brother and my mother during the holidays. I liked it myself. He transmitted his passion for photography and filming to me. Although I never had in mind that it could become a professional and that I could make a living with that and that I could dedicate myself fully to that. It was more like a hobby. Like I said, my dad wanted to be a filmmaker. He made these amazing short films and shot great footage of his family, but then decided, he told me, I was too scared of the financial difficulties of the risky business. It was in the late 50s, early 60s. Television was just at its beginning and cinema seemed unreachable to many. And so he decided to go on a more secure financial career. And he was very successful. And he gave me also the freedom now. He taught me how to use a camera as a little boy already. I was developing black and white pictures in his photography studio in the basement of our house. And then I could participate in the editing of the Super 8 little films he would make for Christmas. And it was a tradition in our family. Every Christmas, he made like an editing of everything that he filmed. throughout the year. It was about half an hour, 45 minutes. So we have these yearly films of all that happened to us. And I'm so thankful today because, first of all, there are some beautiful images. So there are some things I had forgotten about. And when I researched the material and gathered everything that could be of interest, I was like, whoa, there's actually a lot. And then when I was a teenager, I show some excerpts in the film also, but I grabbed, when he bought a video camera and it became a lot easier, it was not film anymore, it was less expensive, I took this video camera immediately the first weekend and started playing with it with my brother. And then we started to do all these fake news sequences, like TV shows, sports, or westerns I would shoot in my garden with my neighbors and so. And regarding that, looking at this material, what I shot as a teenager, just having fun with my mates in my garden on the weekend, I was actually quite shocked with a more sociological eye and look with 30 years of distance. I was like, what do boys do on the weekend with dad's video camera? They show themselves as real men, right? And we play westerns like John Wayne or Steve McQueen we saw on television. And then we do sports. I didn't put the boxing and the karate fights also in the film, but I have some more footage. And then this was the way a boy or boys together would show themselves or stage themselves. And then how do we portray women in a ridiculous way, either as sluts or as stupid housewives in some dumb commercial about some washing machine powder, or I would portray speakerines on television by being a transvestite and ridiculously playing the female gender, or a flamboyant homosexual. And it was all a joke. But I thought it was interesting to see that in their free times, these were the values or the norms or the representations, better said, that we as boys tried to impersonate and incarnate on screen. And I thought it was interesting. It showed a lot about how do a boy define himself when he's 12, 13, 14, 15. He wants to be a male, and what is a male is being not a woman and is not being a homosexual, because a homosexual behaves like a woman, or at least this is what people think. This is what our culture teaches us. And this, I thought, was very interesting. So I was filming myself at the time, and my friends and my brother, unaware of really what I was doing. It was just for fun. And then later on, I actually never really filmed myself, and now I almost never do it. I am not from the YouTube generation now, or selfie generation, or Instagram. I don't really post pictures of myself. I feel quite uncomfortable in front of the camera. This is probably also why I chose to be behind the camera. Now in this film, I am a protagonist, and I had to step into the light in some way and be comfortable with it. But if you look at it in the film, you barely see me today. You see me twice very furtively. And there's a lot of me, of course, in the archive material. I guess it helped me shape now with the distance, and the process of making this film helped me get a better idea of who I was, how I grew up, and what values shaped me, and how I had to free myself from some kind of social structure that was oppressing me. And this film also helped, I realized, to open a form of dialogue within my family. Again, I mean, I had done the coming out process. I had talked a lot with my parents. It was very difficult at the beginning. And then with my grandmother also, I say it in the film. But the interesting thing is that this film allowed, my mother told me this, allowed us to be a better family again, because we can address topics such as your coming out, or sexuality, or family matters, or life and death. Our grandma whatever it is. And the best thing is that apparently it works also on other people, that they can reflect. And I've had many testimonies now, if I may say, that it's because I experienced it on many, many screenings I've been to in the last year. I've been touring with the film, that people that I absolutely don't know come up to me and say, thank you for sharing your story, because it helped me understand my gay son, for instance. Or some elderly woman comes up to me and said, oh my God, my husband is homophobic and my 3 sons are homophobic. What should I do? And I always thought gay people were strange people and these gay pride parades, and they were outraging and provocative. But now with the story of your grandmother, this was one specific testimony, but it was very touching, made me realize, this woman was telling me, made me realize in what kind of dynamic I am in my own family, and helped her have a better understanding of herself, of her gender, of the relationship with her husband or her sons. And this is one example among many others that apparently, this is magic to me, but this film allows dialogue in families or among friends. People talk when they come out of the movie and reflect. And this is the best, the nicest thing a filmmaker can hear.
Yeah. I mean, that is really wonderful. And if I was you, I'd be feeling very happy about that. Overjoyed, in fact. So I'd like to suggest that, and we've spoken about this personally before, but I'd like to suggest that in the same way that your film opens up, people's minds, not just about gay people and women, but also about themselves. I'd like to suggest that the sexual liberation of the space for greater sexual difference that has risen over the last 20 or 30 years creates a freer space, not just for gay and lesbian and trans and bisexual people, etc., but for everybody. That the gay liberation is human liberation and expands everybody's freedom. Can we talk about that a little?
Yes, I agree. And I see it also this way. Maybe some people are still not aware of that and still trapped in some kind of norms and conventions or religious beliefs or whatever it is. But I think it is a fact that first maybe women liberation, but then also the LGBT movement opened up new spaces for people to be themselves in a different way. We don't have to comply to the rules now of what it means to be a woman or a man. I mean, in some traditional countries, cultures, it's still the case. It's very strong. It's still dominant. But in the last 30 years, I think the world opened up. And also, thanks to the internet now, there is information going around, circulating, and there's some kind of rainbow wave that invaded the world and scaring off a lot of people.
Yeah.
They're right to be scared because they thought their monopoly would last forever. It's over. These times are over. We're vocal now, and we're sort of gaining control of the narratives of our lives. Yeah. And we're saying, creating an LGBT festival or showing. We had to do this in many countries because no festival would show queer films or only very little. We had to speak out. And it was my own personal experience also. If I don't speak out, I'm never going to be recognized for who I am. And I contributed a little bit in my community, in my family first, in my circle of friends, and then I expanded it. I became an activist also in my university, and then, going public with my homosexuality. And I think it's very important, this kind of visibility, because then other generations, younger people, or not always young, but people who are more secluded, all of a sudden see that they're not alone. And this feeling of isolation, shame, and guilt, and this feeling of being the only gay in the village, or as we know it, it's scary. And it's a horrible feeling to have. And knowing that there's a community out there that can help, that can support, or at least you can reflect, you can build your identity outside of this binary men, women, and men behave like this and are dominant and need to fuck women, and women need to be fucked and shut up. This is over. And but it's an ongoing process. There is a lot of resistance. There's a lot of obscure forces that would like to put us back into the closet. And we need to fight, I think, still more than ever, because the backslash is actually quite strong now, because we see it in Poland, in Europe, or in Hungary, where, you know, LGBT rights go backwards. They're like LGBT free zones, like, and stuff like that. But still, people have access to information. People are not dumb. The younger generation, hopefully, will not accept that this freedom will be taken away from them. And as you were referring it to, more and more straight people, or who thought they were only straight, realize that there is a whole scale of diversity. You can be straight and kiss a man. You can be a little bit bisexual. You can be trans. You can be in between. You can want, you know, your dick to be cut off. You can be in the wrong body or not, or have a queer identity. I know a lot of straight people now who identify as queer. They embrace this movement because they realized there's more freedom there. Why should I behave like this? You gay people are showing me that actually I can be myself and not care about what the other people think. And this is maybe the lesson of this movement, and some kind of subliminal message that also I wanted to put in the film. You can be whoever you want to be. And if we go beyond these binary structures, this very rigid roles of masculinity and femininity, if we expand the concept of masculinity, then you can be a little boy that is gracious, tender, and sensitive without being a fag. Or you can be a little girl that has short hair and that behaves like a boy. No, it's another way of expressing your femininity. And if we expand the concept of what a man is supposed to be, or just what a man or a woman or all the people who identify in between can be, then we all are better off. I think it's a very simple equation at the end. And I think more and more people are realizing that there's a space there, and that gay people are not predators that want to prey on their children or whatever. I think we're gaining supporters by each film that we're showing, by each work that we're sharing. Diversity is the rule, and everybody is a little bit diverse, and everybody belongs to some kind of minority. You know, the left-handers are also discriminated, or what happens now with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. And I think everything is connected. And when people realize that we can have safe spaces where everybody can be himself, herself, itself, themselves, then I think we live in a better world. And last thing on the topic, I've been living in Berlin now for the last 12 years. Berlin is that kind of microcosm where something like that is possible. It works quite well. It's a big city of 4 million people, but people can be themselves in Berlin and nobody judges them. We have some problems, of course, of violence and here and there, and some people are fighting for this and that, but it works. On a political level, there is respect towards minorities. Switzerland is a quite good example also. It has a long tradition. It was a very patriarchal state also. Women had no rights until the 70s. It was very late, but it has a tradition of respecting minorities. I am not like you, but I'm going to respect and even encourage your language, your religion, or your sexual orientation, or your gender identity. And this helps us all, whoever we are, to get along better with our community and with ourselves.
Yeah, I have to say, living in Berlin for the last few years, you know, living in such an inclusive society, and I know there are issues, but living in such an inclusive society has been really good for me. You know, it's made me a much freer and healthier person. So I totally agree with you on that. I want to ask you a question from Sharon Jackson at Encounters, who just asks you, you covered this a little bit, but well, what has your family's response been to this very intimate film?
It's funny because when I asked my father if I could use the material he had, at first he told me, sure, you can, but I have no idea what you can do with this. And I said, maybe I will do something. And I never, except for that, never asked for their approval or authorization. I made the film. And then when it was finished, I showed it to them. And I was a little anxious of their reaction because like I said before, I was dragging them into this project without really their consent. They did not have a control over the story. And they were pleased. They was like, oh, you made a nice film. But they saw it on a very personal level, and they didn't see the message really because they saw themselves. It was like a family film. And then at the end, my mom, my dad, and my brother all said to me, it's a nice film, Stéphane, but who's going to be interested in watching this? This is just our story. And I said, well, maybe if you're not from our family, you have a different look. And this is just a mirror. This is just a reflection. This is a proposal. This is an essay to be shared and to be also enjoyed and reflected upon by other people. This is the point of making a film, because you want to share some of your ideas. But they then realized, when the looks from the outside came, that maybe there was something more. And I must say, the film is not really fair with my dad, because the narration, the story in the film stops when he actually starts opening up to my homosexuality. My mom can be perceived as just a nice and pretty housewife that bakes apple pies. But she told me also, like, you could have mentioned maybe that I had a career when I met your father. I was a translator and an interpreter, and that I made twice as much money as your dad when I met him. I was a successful young professional in the 60s. And I said, yes, Mom, but the film is about grandma and it's about me, and I have to leave some stuff out. I maybe could have mentioned it. All that to say that their reactions were kind of mixed. But then when they saw the critics in the Swiss press, when they saw that the former Swiss president, Ruth Dreyfus, who's also in the film, came to the premiere at the Locarno Film Festival, and also then in Geneva, when they saw that their friends came to see the film at the cinema, and then they got a compliment, and it was like, oh, what a great film, and it says so much, it moved us, we cried. They're actually now quite proud that the film is being well received. And I think they understood also more, but only in retrospect, what I wanted to say with this film.
Yeah. Okay. Mentisa, us from Encounters, says that the film is very honest and sensitive to the feelings of both you and your grandmother, yet it's also very controlled. How did you navigate between these two polarities?
What was the last question? There was just an interruption. Just the between the.
How did you navigate between the polarities of your grandmother and you? Because you know you're very different characters, but there's this invisible thread that links you both.
Yes, it was a very fine line, I would say. I wanted to be as honest as possible in this film, absolutely. And it was not always possible. You have to make some shortcuts in the editing in order for the story to be told. The first version was more than 3 hours long, and it was too much, and you would get bored, and it would not necessarily reflect the truth. I learned something in the process of making this film, and it's a documentary film, but it's a little bit constructed like a fiction. But there are no actors. I stage some situations in my bathroom at first, or where I dig into old photographies and stuff like that. But otherwise, it's only material that was existing there. And it's only the art of putting it together. And then what do I show? What do I leave out? I learned that sometimes you have to lie, and I put this in quotations. You have to lie in order to tell the truth.
Yeah.
If you say absolutely everything about a situation, the viewer on the other side of the screen might get bored, or you have to catch the viewer also with some kind of emotion. And in order to generate this emotion, it's a subtle mix between image, sound, music, rhythm, and then what comes after. What's the next sequence? The sequence that comes after can kill the previous one.
Yeah.
And annihilate it. I mean, I guess it's the art of editing. Then we tried to be as faithful to the life story of my grandmother as I knew it. But I had only a limited amount of material. My grandmother died 15 years ago. I could not interview her for the film. So everything that I had was there in my possession, but nothing more. So no extra. I was lucky enough to have her voice recorded and all these images. But then how do I shape her story? Was it truthful? I left some parts out. She had more lovers, I know, but she never told me about them. I have no pictures of them. So I could have maybe said it in my voiceover. Why not? But I tried to construct the film as a dialogue between her and myself. So I decided to leave out some objective considerations or about her life.
Yeah.
I let her be the narrator of her own life. And then the most difficult part was with me. When my grandmother was in place in the editing, and I was like, okay, she tells her story, there's this and that. But then how do I tell my own story? I am still alive. I am still with my emotions. I am doing the process myself. Am I being honest right now when I write this sentence? What is honesty? What is truth? And I was confronted to these questions all the time in every sequence. Like, is this true enough? Or is my memory playing tricks on me? Did I want this passage to be like that? Did I really feel like that when I was 8? Could I have said such a thing or thought such a thing when I was 12? I tried to be as honest as possible, but then also I played a little bit with it to give it some kind of shape. And in the end, there are some, like I said, I don't call them lies because absolutely everything that I say in this film is true, but there are some shortcuts that only I and only my family know that there's something behind or in between. The viewers can then interpret it or feel it, receive it the way they want. They can project things into like what happened there in between, or maybe they don't even think about it. They take it as a global, but the emotion needs to be relevant and needs to work. And this feeling of authenticity and truth, I think we managed to get in the end. And my editor and my assistant once again helped me a great deal. I was like, I think this is working. They always were my catalysator and also my way of measuring. It was like, is this good enough? Is this true enough? Does this work? It might not be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but the feeling that comes out of it is some kind of truth. And this is what I want to get across.
Yeah, it's so fascinating the need to put in a little bit of artifice to make reality convincing.
Yes.
To make it feel truthful. In the film, a line that struck me was you spoke about all the things you couldn't say to your grandmother, to Caroline. Do you think that it's true? Do you think that possibly you could have said a lot more to her, and she would have got used to it? And I ask this because she seems, in a way, despite her initial opposition to your sexuality, she seems like somebody who could easily have married a gay man, and who might have been happy with that kind of relationship.
Yes, I wish she had married a gay man and not that she's, and her first husband was clearly not a nice guy, and she escaped very quickly and divorced, and then was repudiated by her family and started her life on her own, all alone, and she became successful. Then she met my grandpa, and it was okay. He was a nice guy, but he was too weak for my grandmother. He would be crushed by her strong personality. But she had someone nice in the end. Then could I have talked about more edgy subject? It was difficult to talk to my grandmother for two reasons, I would say. One, there was this respect that you have for your grandmother. I feared her sometimes. She was a dragon. She was such a dumb, and she would always wanted to be in control, and she would dictate the narration, and she would ask questions, and you could not interrupt her or ask her touchy questions. You knew that you would get into trouble or that she would feel uncomfortable. And for instance, after my coming, and when I did these first interviews, without the aim of having a film, but like I said, just recording her before she died in her 90s, she opened up also about some of her stories or her wedding night that I had never heard while I was youth. She's from a generation also that was very pudic, you say, or very self-conscious about sexuality or intimate private life you would not share with people.
Yeah.
And it was, I would say, impossible to address sexuality with her. Maybe if I had had the courage, but you have to understand, and I think it's for everybody like that, it's not specifically her that was not responsive, it's the situation.
Yeah. Sure.
You don't do that. You don't talk about sex, and you don't talk about your ass with your parents, and then, or with your grandparents, even worse. And it was always a controlled setting. I would visit her at her home, and we would have lunch, and she would show me the latest pictures she painted in her atelier, in her little workshop. There was not always room for me, but even with my boyfriend, you know, I was out, I had the feeling I could be honest with my grandmother, but I could not always tell her everything. There's always some kind of image you want to preserve her. And some things that would shock her, or I would maybe not say. And this film, it could be seen or perceived as coward. It's like, oh, she's dead now, you can say everything you want. I try to have that in mind too. It's like, okay, I talk about anal sexuality in some, you know, ways in this film. Probably she would have felt uncomfortable if she saw the film today with such a topic. I tried to find a way to say these things that were impossible to say back then, as a kid, as a teenager, or even in your community, not only with my family, but there are things you cannot talk about to your teacher or to your religious leader or to your coach in your sports team or whatever. You have to comply to the rules. And with my grandma, you could go a little bit further. You could play with life. You could do it in a funny, humorous way. Maybe everything that is below the belt was sort of taboo for a lady of her generation. And I see it still difficult today, even to talk about sexuality, even with friends sometimes, or with your family, with parents, with friends, with brothers, siblings, and so on. Yeah. This film, once again, apparently allows some little window to open in some situations, and people feel freer to talk about it because they were just touched by some emotions. And this I think is a very rewarding feeling.
We need to start winding down soon, so I have two more questions for you, but I just want to quickly respond to what you said now. First, you know, I do think it's easy to forget how much the world has changed in the 15 years or so since your grandmother died. But I do think that we are always a little bit nervous about engaging with our direct community and direct family about our personal sexuality. And I'm thinking specifically, you know, this summer in Berlin, I've been to, you know, a few kind of naked beaches. And what has always struck me is that you'll have families there, and you'll have gay guys, and you know, you'll have a full spectrum of kind of German society. But what you never get is teenagers with their parents.
Yeah, it's true.
So that is a taboo that kind of remains quite solidly in place, I think. I still, I mean, I'm very comfortable with my parents, but I won't really engage too much in matters of sexuality. Love and relationships, sure, but actual sex,
Yeah.
We have a question from Mandisa, which is a very relevant one at the moment. How are you managing the release of Madame to theaters and festivals during COVID?
The release, right now the film is being released in France. It's a little bit frustrating for me not to be able to go everywhere, to travel everywhere. Less people are going to the movie theaters. In France, they reopened a couple of weeks ago, or I think even 6 or 8 weeks ago. It's a little bit frustrating, honestly. I've had the luck to launch the film a year and a half ago. So I already had 1 year of career of traveling the world, of going to New York, to Taiwan, to Montreal, to so many countries. So the crisis itself didn't crush my project. For some other filmmakers and some other artists, but everyone was affected on the planet. So I'm still very privileged. I had this film out. I could live freely in Berlin in my apartment. We could go out. I didn't feel the restrictions so much. Of course, I would have loved to go to Tokyo, to Cape Town, to Kiev, to Cameroon, where I was invited to show the film. So I guess we'll have to cope with that. And, I think this crisis will be over soon. It might take 6 months, a year, maybe, but we will manage it. We always have. Humanity gets over those things, and science is also amazing. Maybe we'll find a vaccine or something like that, and people will go back to the movies, and hopefully we can meet again in person at festivals. And because this is a great feeling, and there's nothing comparable to this. To this feeling of being together, Zoom is great, but live is better.
And there's a very special pleasure being together with strangers in a darkened room. That is still magical. We have 2 more questions from the audience that we're going to take before we wind down. So I'm going to shut up myself and just say that Andy Miller says he's interested in grandma's older children, Stéphane's uncles. Where are they now in your story?
Say that again. I'm sorry. Stéphane's uncles and
so grandma's older children. So your uncles, yeah. So where are they now in the real life story?
The first child of my grandmother is indeed my uncle. He's still alive. He is 92 years old now. He's in good shape. Unfortunately, I can't really go into this because we had some private family issues many years ago that made it that we are not really in touch anymore.
Okay.
And all I can say is that my grandmother herself had a very difficult youth, as she is telling in the film, and she had difficult relationships with both of her sons, including my father, also, that was born 10 years after the first child.
Yeah.
And it was never easy for both her sons to get along with their mother. She was absent sometimes. She was working. She gave them a good education, I think, in some principle, but it was hard. She loved them, but she was quite absent. And, at first, in the first version of the film, I had my dad also in it, interviewed, telling about his own mother, and also my mom telling about my grandmother. And I had all these point of views. I decided also to leave them out of the final editing, in order to give more intimacy and more relevance to our story and to this dialogue between a grandmother and her grandson, and not to make a talking head documentary where everybody is giving the point of view a little bit the American way. I wanted to generate this kind of intimacy, and maybe it would have been another film, you know, but I left that out. And you know, my uncle, unfortunately, I know that my aunt saw the film and that my cousin also, but it's a part of the family that we are not really in touch with anymore.
Sure. And these things do happen in family life, and there's especially more in the past than now, I hope. We have one more question from the audience, and then I have a tiny little question to end with. Sorry, I just need to scroll up a little bit. Chulofelo Kwakwa again asks the following question. It is said that your family or parents always know about their children's sexuality before they are even told. I'm glad that grandma supported and accepted you despite your fears. You two had an amazing relationship. If she had not mentioned it, would you really have not opened up to her about your sexuality?
I would have. I think I would have. By all means. I felt awkward not telling her. I tried to give her some hints. It was not difficult. It was brushed aside at first. You know, I say it in the film at some point when I organized this panel about same-sex marriage back in 1995. It was quite new back then to talk about these issues. And I brought her this flyer. Then I don't tell the story until the end, but really when I was sitting at the dinner table at my grandma's place, and my aunt was there also actually, and I said, well, I'm organizing this panel discussion about same-sex marriage. Here's a flyer. And then there's silence. We don't know what to do with it. And then it's go, can you pass me the salad, please?
Yeah.
This is the way it was meant. This was the way it was received. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll drop it. But it breaks my heart not to be able to be open. My aunt, to be honest, I didn't really care. But my grandmother, I felt so close to her. And then I felt, I'm telling it in the film, I couldn't look at her in the eyes anymore. The gap between us was growing and growing. And then, as I also say in the film, some people would say, you know what, she's already 85, forget it. She won't understand. She's too old. And I was like, damn, do I have to wait until the day she dies? And until then, do I have to lie to her? This is horrible. I don't want to do that. And somehow, then I went to Spain. I was like, okay, it was for a semester. I ended up staying a little bit longer. I could breathe a little bit also away from Geneva, away from my grandmother also. And she kept calling me, you know, do you have a girlfriend? I was like, and she knew, she sort of knew, but didn't want to know. And to respond to the question, it's funny, when we don't want to hear something, our human brain is capable of schemes that, no, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that you're smoking. I don't want to see that you're gay, so I'm avoiding the thought, and it works.
Yeah.
It works. You know, it's called delusion, or it's called denial, or whatever you call it, but it happens. And I must say to that, we are trained to play a role, to be accepted in our social circle as men, women, fathers, mothers, pupils, whatever. And very early on, I think you understand, as a little boy, I understood I have to behave this way to please my family, to be a good son, to be a good grandson. And then you start, in my case, because of I could not express my homosexuality, I understood it unconsciously first, and then consciously in my teenage years. But I was a master myself, first at lying to myself, like, no, I'm not like that. Oh yeah, like boys, but I'm not like, and then playing comedy. Yeah. So I would put up a show for my environment the entire time, playing the straight boy. So when you play the straight boy for 22 years in a row, you can understand the kind of shock reaction when it finally comes out that you're not straight.
Yeah.
So you have to have some kind of compassion also. But on the other side, my parents or my grandmother, your relatives, need to have also some kind of understanding. But for them, the emotional shock is sometimes really strong. It was like, because I played comedy really well. Nobody suspected it. Some did. Even my mom said, I never really, you know, now that you're saying it, okay, you were a sensitive little boy and this and that, and this is a little cliche even to say it, but I was like, Mom, I was hiding it. I was taught to hide it. I learned how to hide it myself in order to protect myself, in order to be accepted. And I think a lot of people do that for many different reasons, not only because they're gay or lesbian or bi or something, but we need to be a little bit more honest about ourselves. And then we feel that the communication is a lot better, because then usually, and this is maybe the lesson I taught, usually when I came out, or even with this film now, people say, you make yourself vulnerable. Be careful. It can be dangerous. You open up. Usually people, they don't attack you for that. They respect that. And even if they're not in the same situation, like, oh, you have the respect to be who you are, even if you don't please all the social conventions. Respect for that. Maybe I could learn from that. And sometimes they're even inspired and they open up to you. And it's like, oh, but you tell me you're gay, then you know what? Well, I've had whatever, this accident I never talked about, or this flaw that I am ashamed of, but I can tell it to you. And we open up, and then some better communication installs in the room in between, and it opens up. And this is a good feeling. I think it's a liberating, exhilarating feeling.
Yeah. Cool. I have one more question I want to ask you, but I really would like to ask you, maybe we can discuss it later, is about your response to Hannah Gadsby's Nanette and the nature of the ways in which we comedize ourselves or make
sorry,
ourselves
there was
to be acceptable.
sorry, Peter. There was a technical problem. It jumped. I didn't hear your full question.
Oh, okay, now I was just wondering if you'd seen Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, but we don't really have time for your response. I'd like to, we can discuss that separately. I need to ask you about your feelings about the state of Swiss cinema today.
Swiss cinema today?
Yeah, sorry, just bearing in mind that your film is part of the Swiss focus at Encounters this year, it is a relevant question, even if it's just one out of the blue.
Yes. My opinion of Swiss cinema, or the state of the Swiss cinema, I don't know who am I, who I am to talk. I mean, I follow Swiss cinema. I have many colleagues that I know also. I think Swiss cinema is going through a phase of renewal, if one might say so. Switzerland is a very small country, as you might know, and it's divided into four different regions. We have different religions, we have different languages. It's very difficult to communicate. And we're a very small nation, meaning that we cannot produce huge movies because we don't have enough people on the national level to go to the movies. Same with books and everything. You know, when you grow up in Geneva, it's the biggest city in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. There's a film school there, but everybody knows that if you want to have a career, you have to go to Paris. Paris is our cultural capital, but it's actually a different country. You don't have the same, we don't have the same passport, and Switzerland is not part of the European Union. So we cannot freely circulate like this. If you're in the German-speaking part, usually you go to Berlin. If you're in the Italian-speaking part, usually you go to Milan or to Rome. These are our cultural capitals. The literature, the industry is there. So Swiss cinema always have to find its place on a national level that is torn by different cultures, languages. We don't always understand each other, but we have this federal system that binds us together as a nation. And we have a federal office of cinema that gives public money out to support film creation. So I think we have a great system. We have quite some money for the scale of the country. We cannot compete with bigger countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, or the UK or America, but we can do something. I know that the documentary scene in Switzerland is very, very vivid, and that we have great, great talents. It's not always easy for them to express themselves within the borders of the country. So they need to leave, to go abroad, to meet people, to open up. There's still Swiss filmmakers. You know, I moved to Berlin and I travel all the time, but I keep very, very strong ties to Switzerland. My production company is in Geneva, and you know, this last film was a Swiss production with Swiss money, and I'm so grateful. And I take this opportunity to thank Switzerland for the support they've been showing, Swiss Films for their support for this encounter selection. Also, they are making things possible, the Swiss consulate also, and they're supporting me all around the world. They have this great network, they support their artists, and I think every country should do so.
Agreed. That's fantastic to hear. We need to absolutely wrap up now, so I'm just going to ask you one short kind of throwaway question, which is, your grandmother, you know, was a hairdresser and she was pretty critical of your hair.
I know what you're going to ask.
Yeah, so what would she think of your hair right now?
She would be horrified. Most probably, she would not stop poking me about this. She would not stop, and she would probably take her hairbrush. I was like, cut that hair off, it doesn't suit you, you look like a street kid, what does it mean? She would probably react like this, but maybe she would still accept if she was here to come on stage with me, because her love was stronger than any prejudice or any little superficial thing.
Sure. And I think that is the great message of the film. Thank you, Stéphane. Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you, Encounters, for hosting us both. Everybody, if you haven't seen the film yet, watch it. It really is. It's a wonderful film. It's one of the best docus I've seen in quite a while. It's super engaging. It's very moving. Give it a watch. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peter. And thank you to all the viewers at Encounters. Thank you, South Africa. Bye-bye.
Ciao.